And so there, at the end of that passage, there's a verse that I used to pull out of my holster like a pistol, and I used to pop all of you right in the head with it. Bam, bam, bam. Answer that, Catholic, because it says, Jesus said, "These words that I speak to you are spirit and life. The flesh profits nothing." Okay, Catholics. I've listened to you go through this whole passage about eating flesh and drinking blood and the Eucharist and the Mass and everything else. Now you get to my verse. The flesh profits nothing. The words I speak to you are spirit and life. They're symbolic. But what is Jesus really saying here? He's saying that the words I speak to you are not easy to understand. They are spirit and life and truth. They're sacramental. They're a mystery. And the flesh profits nothing. What does Jesus mean by the flesh profits nothing? That's what I mean about studying the Bible. You come to a verse like this and say, my goodness, is he just denying everything he said in the whole chapter ahead? No, he's not. You look at the verse and you ask questions. What does Jesus mean, the flesh? Does he mean his flesh? His flesh profits nothing? If you take that position, you have proved too much. Because you're saying that the incarnation, that Jesus, God himself coming into a body was unnecessary because the flesh of Christ, you just said here, is unnecessary. The flesh profits nothing. The incarnation simply means incarn. What's carn? A carnivore eats what? Meat. Incarn means in flesh. If you say that the flesh of Jesus profits nothing, you've just denied the gospel. You've just denied the need for Jesus, God himself becoming in flesh, becoming a man. You've denied the bodily resurrection at the end of time. You've proved too much. But what does Jesus mean here? The flesh profits nothing. All through John chapter 6, he says, my flesh, my flesh, my flesh. And then he changes it here in verse 63 to the flesh. This is why I love computerized Bible study. I joke around with people and said, as soon as I became Catholic, I never opened a Bible again. That's because I do it all on computer now. Even on my little handheld here, I have 10 translations of the Bible, Greek and Hebrew dictionaries, the Catechism. You don't need to open a book anymore. It's at your fingertips, and I can compare translations, and I can do a search. And I can say, search in the Gospel of John for anywhere it says, the flesh. Bingo, right there. First one my eye's drawn to is John 8:15. Jesus is arguing with the Jews again. And he says, you are judging in all these things, but you are judging wrong because you judge according to the flesh. What does he mean, you judge according to the flesh? It's very simple. The Jews were trying to understand this with their fleshly mind. The word flesh means many things in the Bible. You have to translate it. It's always the word sarx, S-A-R-X. It's always the same word, but it's defined by its context. Sometimes it means all of life on the earth. Sometimes it means only mankind. Flesh being all flesh sinned, or it can also mean meat. Like a steak on the table, flesh. It can also mean that which is part of our being, separated from the revelation and the grace of God. So in other words, the flesh here is representing us with our carnal mind separated from the revelation of God. It's the flesh. We're trying to understand it in our own carnal, fleshly mind. Some Bible translations, the New American Standard Bible and the Revised Standard, say, you judge according to the flesh. It's very literal. But the NIV, the new Protestant darling New Testament, which is replacing the King James, says you judge according to human standards. The New American Bible, which is a Catholic translation, says you judge according to appearances. Appearances. You're judging according to appearances. And when you see this, you judge based on what your eyes tell you that it's bread and wine. Jesus said, you're judging according to the flesh. He's arguing with these people. The flesh profits nothing. What do you mean by that? It means that with your own eyes, you cannot judge this properly. If you look at it and say it's bread and wine, you've judged it improperly. You have to judge it in a different way. Everything that exists in the world today, we cannot determine with our five senses. I like to say this. Right now, every one of you should know what the weather's going to be tomorrow and what the news is going on right now. Why? Because all of those TV channels, all of those radio signals are going right through your brain. But why don't you know the weather today or what it's going to be tomorrow? Because you don't have the technology to pick up those signals in your brain, do you? I have right here on this is also Wi-Fi and the internet. If there's a wireless internet, I can pick it up here. But it's also going through your brains, but you can't pick it up. Why? Because you don't have the technology to pick it up. Does that mean it doesn't exist? No, it just means according to the flesh, the five senses you have, you can't pick all this stuff up. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist any more than just because we can't see that this is the body and blood of Christ means it doesn't exist. A friend of mine named Jim Ball. I apologize to Margie. You can cover your ears. She said, "You don't have to tell that story, do you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." A friend of mine, a scientist, he lives in Saline, Michigan. And when I became Catholic, he says to me, "Steve, I'm a biochemist at Ford Motor Company, and I can prove to you that the Eucharist is not the body and blood of Christ." And I said, "How can you do that?" He said, "With my microscope." He said, "What I want you to do is go to Mass after you're Catholic, and I want you to eat the Eucharist. And an hour later, I want you to come up to my house, and I want you to vomit it up, and we're going to put it in my microscope. If it's still a carbohydrate, that means it's still bread. If it registers as a protein, then I'll go along with you that it's become flesh, because obviously meat's a protein and bread's a carbohydrate." So what would you have said to him? I said, "Of course I'll do it. Remember who I am. I'm an adventurer. I have nothing to fear. I'm a Catholic. It's the truth. What do I have to fear from your microscope?" But then I said at the same time, "Lord, what should I tell him?" And the Lord says, "Yes, but tell him this first. Tell him you want to first establish the basis for this experiment and what can a microscope actually determine." Got it, Lord. I knew exactly what to ask him. I said, "Okay, Jim, I'll do this with you. However, what I want to do first is I want you to give me a scientific basis of what we'll actually be able to determine with your microscope." And I'll say, "Jim, this is an example I'd like you to explain to me. If you and I were walking down the Jordan Valley towards Jerusalem and Jesus was coming the other way, the curly-haired little Jewish guy with the dirty sandals and so on, unshaven, you know, that guy that looks just like a man, who looks just like a Jewish guy. And I walk up to him and say, 'Are you Jesus?' He says, 'Yes.' I take my Swiss Army knife out of my pocket, and before he has the time to react, I cut the tip of his finger off. And I take the tip of his finger and I put it in your microscope, Jim. Would you be able to detect the divinity of Christ?" He said, "No. I'd only be able to detect his humanity." And I said, "Really? But you're a Baptist. Even by your theology, you will admit that Jesus is 100% man, which you could test with your microscope, but also that he's 100% God. And if you did your test, you'd have to deny that he is God. Because the flesh, the five senses, and the microscope, let's face it, is only the extenuating of one of the senses, sight. Because if with the five senses you can't prove that he's God, then you're going to, by this experiment, have to deny he's God. So what are we going to prove with the Eucharist, Jim?" "Oh," he says, "touche, but I'll be back." I do not believe that this is the body and blood of Christ because it smells like flesh and reeks like blood. I believe it because God tells me so, and he has the technology to know a whole lot more than my five senses technology can tell me. Even, for example, I heard this the other day. If you take a quarter out of your pocket, I don't have one, I'm poor, but if you take a quarter out of your pocket and you feel it, doesn't it feel solid? And yet it's not. If you look at it with a microscope, what is a quarter if you get down to it small enough? It's a whole bunch of atoms. And what are atoms? Protons, neutrons, and electrons spinning around in space. It's the gravity and the centrifugal force that holds it into a solid. But if you were to look at a quarter down smaller, you would see that it's 99.9% air and space. The substance of a quarter is air. It's space, and yet when you hold it, what does it look like? A solid thing. You can't put your finger, you can't bend it, it's solid. But your eyes are lying to you about the substance of the quarter. I can't see it with my eyes. How am I to judge what happens here? I'm going to believe God, what he says. I want to close because I have 15 minutes left, or actually 10.